Hello, my name is Cookie Rivera. I am the Outreach Director for the Latino Action Network Foundation, and I know that there's a couple of you coming in right now. So please stay tuned as we set up the live stream. And what I would ask you all to do as you come in is to please in the chat, get very used to the chat. And I will say this again when we get a few more folks here, to share your name and organization there so that we know who's with us, as well as any questions you might have or comments you might have. Also become very comfortable with the chat so that we can present all the information that we have this evening. There's a lot of information, and we will make all efforts to answer any and every question that we receive in the chat tonight. This press conference is being recorded, so we will share how this will be shared later. So stay tuned for a couple of minutes, and I will repeat this in about 2 more minutes. Thank you for being with us, and we absolutely have a full house, so thank you again.
Um, we just started. Well, thank you again, everyone. I'm Amos Cayley. I'm one of the pastors at the Reformed Church of Highland Park. I'm also one of the organizers for New Jersey Prison Justice Watch. We're going to hear a lot more about what New Jersey Prison Justice Watch does and has been doing in the moments to follow, as well as some just amazing panelists and presenters who are joining me on the screen right now. As a preview for this event, this press conference, we are releasing a report called Isolated Voices today. It's the product of, as you're going to hear, a lot of time and energy and communications with folks who are on the inside of the New Jersey prison justice system. And we're going to be learning a lot more about what that report entails. Just some housekeeping stuff, as we mentioned just a minute ago, but now that we're recording, I want to say, if you have any questions that you want to submit, you can submit those questions through the Q&A function if you're in the Zoom call. If you're not in the Zoom call, you can submit questions on the live stream, wherever this is being live streamed, in the chat function. You can also, and this is very important, you can email our coalition at any time at contact, the word contact, at NJPJW, which stands for New Jersey Prison Justice Watch, njpjw.org. It'll just be sufficient to say that New Jersey Prison Justice Watch is a coalition. It's not an organization. It's always been a coalition of many different organizations and stakeholders. The most important stakeholders that New Jersey Prison Justice Watch holds are people who are directly impacted by the criminal legal system of New Jersey. And what that means is any family member, any currently incarcerated person, any formerly incarcerated person, any person who finds themselves kind of in the crosshairs of what the criminal legal system does, which is court involvement, justice involvement. At any point, we welcome you into our coalition, and just reach out to us if you'd like to be more involved. It's without further ado and with just great honor that I'm going to be introducing Jim Sullivan, who is one of the policy directors, the deputy policy director over at the ACLU of New Jersey. And he's going to share just a bit more about what our coalition has been up to over the years and why we have gathered together today. Jim?
Thanks, Amos. Good evening. Like Amos said, my name is Jim Sullivan, and I'm the Deputy Policy Director with the ACLU of New Jersey. We are a proud member of the coalition that got the Isolated Confinement Restriction Act, or ICRA, passed, and I'm here tonight to give a quick history of the bill, its passage, and where it stands now. Could we go to the first slide, please? So let's start with the description of the bill. The bill was patterned after the Mandela rules passed by the United Nations in 2015. The rules, named after the great Nelson Mandela, who spent 27 years incarcerated, outline minimum prison conditions, provide guidance, and set clear benchmarks for prison staff on how to uphold safety, security, and human dignity. The bill defines isolated confinement by the experience of 20 or more hours in a cell alone or with another person, no more than 20 days consecutively in isolation, and no more than 30 days in every 60-day period. In addition, it includes severe restrictions on mobility and access to services. The bill also requires safeguards for medical safety and mental health, requiring regular clinical assessments for those in isolation. It also prohibits isolation of vulnerable populations, people under 21, people over 65, people dealing with mental health issues, people with disabilities, those with a serious medical condition, pregnant people, and members of the LGBTQI community. Next slide, please. So let's talk about passing the law. In 2014, a group of impacted leaders and advocates called the New Jersey Coalition Against Isolated Confinement, now known as New Jersey Prison Justice Watch, introduced legislation limiting the use of solitary confinement in prisons and jails. For the next 2 years, the coalition worked with the bill's supporters, county jail wardens, unions representing corrections officers, and mental health experts and faith leaders to inform legislators about the moral imperative to end the practice. In 2016, after the legislature passed the bill, Governor Christie vetoed it, contending that the bill seeks to resolve a problem that does not exist in New Jersey because the Department of Corrections in this administration does not utilize isolated confinement as contemplated by the bill. That was untrue. In the months that followed, legislators heard from formerly incarcerated people who had survived the horrors of solitary confinement. They heard firsthand stories from people who reported experiencing the severe negative physiological and psychological reactions that studies had linked to severe isolation, including self-mutilation, rage, and perceptual distortions and hallucinations. Moved by these stories, heeding the recommendations of mental health experts, and following the example of other states that had safely reduced their reliance on isolation, the legislature passed an identical bill to the one Governor Christie had vetoed in 2019. Next slide, please. And on July 11, 2019, Governor Murphy signed that bill into law. And in that bill that he signed, the Department of Corrections had until August 1st, 2020 to develop the regulations for implementing ICRA. However, that did not happen. Next slide, please. So after signing the bill, COVID hit New Jersey hard and implementation was delayed. Instead of deliberate implementation, the regulations promulgated by the Department of Corrections were inadequate to say the least. Today, 4 years later, the law designed to protect people from torture is still not being implemented correctly, which is unacceptable and an injustice. There are severe consequences when a bill is not implemented correctly or at all, as you will hear tonight. Thank you. Thank you for your time, and I'll pass it back to Amos.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Thanks for the leadership of the ACLU from the beginning of this coalition. I want to turn it over immediately to one of my colleagues in this work, Dante Hatcher, who is truly a leader in this effort. He's, I have to say, the primary architect of this report. He is one of the administrative organizers for New Jersey Prison Justice Watch. And in so many ways, he leads this group, not just because of his knowledge, but because of his experiences directly impacted by the criminal legal system. And so, Dante, it's my privilege to turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Amos. I appreciate it. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dante Hatcher again, and it is an honor to be here tonight to address you today on behalf of New Jersey Prison Justice Watch. I'm sorry. For years, as you've heard, we've been steadfastly advocating against inhumane treatment of individuals incarcerated in New Jersey's prisons, particularly the cruel practice of isolation. The atrocities that unfold in these settings are not just words on paper. They are lived experience that we are here to amplify. We are very grateful to the newly reformed Office of Corrections Ombudsman, who are charged with playing the role of monitoring and reporting on the conditions of prisons in New Jersey. Just over the past 2 years, they've reported on causes like overheating, loss of possessions, and blocked access to communication with loved ones. Most pivotally, they reported on the insufficient out-of-cell time being offered in the 4 biggest prisons. And this report was especially crucial in our work to seek full implementation of ICRA. Last year, the OCO conducted a thorough investigation. This investigation into the out-of-cell time provided at several New Jersey prisons, including New Jersey State Prison, Etna Mahan Correctional Facility, Northern State Prison, and Southwood State Prison. The report, which was released in October, marked a significant milestone in drawing attention to the conditions faced by incarcerated individuals and galvanized our efforts to launch our own survey project. Our primary aim was to gain firsthand insight into how solitary confinement and other forms of isolation impact the lives, health, and well-being of those experiencing it. While we initially distributed the survey to individuals we knew within various prisons, it was remarkable that a significant number of responses came from individuals we were not initially aware of. Individuals who were confined in solitary confinement units. Their bravery in participating in this survey, often at great personal risk, underscores the critical importance of shedding light on these injustices. Now I would like to take the time and to go into some of the survey's findings that we had while taking these surveys. I want to briefly walk through some of the trends and findings from our survey outlined in more detail in our report. 1, insufficient out-of-cell time. Our survey revealed that incarcerated individuals are not being granted sufficient out-of-cell time. 66% of respondents reported that they were offered less than 1 hour out of their cell each day. Even more concerning, 94% indicated they were being offered less than 4 hours out of cell time required by the Isolated Confinement Restriction Act. Shockingly, the most common duration reported was only 30 minutes per day. On average, respondents were only given 70 minutes out of cell. Secondly, I would like to draw your attention on the extended isolation beyond legal limits. ICRA was enacted to ensure that no one is kept in isolation for more than 20 days at a time, with no more than 30 days of isolation within the 60 days. Our findings indicate that these legal limits are routinely violated, excluding a few who receive sufficient out-of-cell time. Respondents reported being isolated for a median of 210 days, roughly 7 months, in confinement. Even more alarming, 10 individuals shared that they have been in isolation for over 4 years, every single day since ICRA's passage in 2019. I would next like to shine the light on the deteriorating physical and mental health. The effects of isolation extend far beyond the time spent in the cell. Our survey showed that 66% of respondents reported suffering both physical and mentally due to their confinement. The damage is both immediate, such as the torment of lying in a small enclosed space for prolonged periods and long term, manifesting in lasting physical ailments and psychological trauma. These are not just abstract numbers. They represent real human suffering. Lack of improvement in prison conditions. When asked if they had seen any positive changes in isolation confinement practices over the past 3 years, every respondent answered no. 1/3 of these respondents, without prompting, added that the conditions had worsened. The human cost the testimonies of isolation, the truth behind the walls. At this point, I want to shift from the numbers and statistics to the real core of the work. I want you to hear the voices of those who have experienced isolation firsthand. These testimonies are the heart of our report and give life to the cold facts we've shared. We are privileged to have with us today several incredibly brave individuals who have survived these conditions and are willing to share their stories. Their experiences speak volume about why isolated confinement is a practice that must be ended. To begin, I'd like to introduce the 2024 Truman Scholarship Award winner, Mr. Paul Boyd. Paul spent an extended period of isolation and has agreed to share his experience with the living conditions in these units. His story will shed light on just how dehumanizing and unbearable this environment is for those subjected to it. Mr. Paul Boyd.
Thank you, Dante, and thank you everyone for listening to me today. I stand before you today. My hands are trembling, my voice is threatening to break. My name is Paul Boyd, as he pointed out, and I'm here to tell you about the 90 days that nearly broke me, my time in solitary confinement. Imagine being buried alive. Now imagine that your coffin is made of cold, unforgiving concrete, and you're still breathing, still aware, still alive. That was my reality for the 3 long months. The cell, if you can call it that, was no longer than a parking space. With my arms outstretched, my fingertips grazed both walls. The ceiling hung low, like a weight on my chest, making each breath a conscious effort. The air, God, the air. It was thick with the stench of despair, a nauseating cocktail of urine, blood, and semen that clung to my nostrils, invaded my lungs, and seemed to seep into my very pores. And I wasn't alone in that cell. No, I had plenty of company, unwelcome, skittering, terrifying company. Roaches. They emerged from cracks I couldn't see, their antennae twitching, their tiny legs a constant whisper against the concrete. Sometimes in the dead of night, I'll feel them crawl across my skin and I have to bite back or scream. But the roaches weren't the worst of it. They were mice too. I'd hear them scratching and gnawing, fighting over the crumbs from my meager meals. Their beady eyes would gleam in the darkness, watching, always watching. I began to envy them. At least they had each other. And the cold, the relentless cold, it seeped from the concrete, chilling me to my bones. No amount of huddling or wrapping myself in the thin, ragged excuse for a blanket could ward it off. My teeth chattered constantly, a Morse code of misery that no one could hear or understand. Sleep, when it came, was fitful and plagued by nightmares. I jolted awake, heart racing, sweat mingling with ever-present chill, unsure if the screams I heard were my own or those of my fellow inmates, the vampires as I called them. Their cries, like screeching violins, would start as night fell and continue until dawn, a hellish symphony of broken minds and shattered souls. Days blurred into weeks. I lost track of time, of self. The only marker of passing days was the degradation of my body and my mind. My muscles atrophied, my joints swelled and screamed in protest with every movement. The constant light burned my eyes, yet the darkness that crept into my mind was far more terrifying. I talked to myself, carrying on conversations with people who weren't there, couldn't be there. I began to forget the sound of my mother's voice, the feeling of a gentle touch, and the warmth of a genuine smile. These human connections, once so fundamental to my existence, became distant memories, fading like old photographs. The loneliness, it was a living thing, a monster that gnawed at my insides, hollowing me out until I wasn't sure if I was still me anymore. I would have given anything, and I mean anything, for a kind word, a human touch, even a look of acknowledgement from the guards who brought my food. But in their eyes, I wasn't human. I was a number, a problem to be contained, forgotten. Meal times became a cruel joke. The food, if you could call it that, was often cold, congealed, unidentifiable. The oatmeal, a thick glutinous mass, could have been used to seal cracks in the walls. But hunger twisted my gut and I ate, hating myself with every swallow. As the days wore on, my mind began to fracture. I saw things that couldn't be there, faces in the walls, shadows that moved of their own accord. The line between reality and hallucination blurred until I no longer knew which was which. Was I going mad? Had I already gone mad? In that cell, in that isolation, it didn't even matter to me. I thought of ending it all constantly. The pain, the loneliness, the sheer unrelenting hopelessness of it all became too much to bear. But even in my darkest moments, a tiny spark of defiance remained. I wouldn't, and I couldn't let them win. I wouldn't let this place destroy me completely. When I was finally released from my solitary, I was a shell of my former self. The world seemed too big, too loud, and too bright. Human interaction, once so natural, now felt alien and overwhelming. I had survived, yes, but at what cost? So I stand before you today, my voice a little shaky and my eyes brimming with unshed tears, to tell you this: solitary confinement is not justice. It is not rehabilitation. It is torture, plain and simple. It breaks minds, bodies, and souls. It turns human beings into hollow shells, stripped of dignity, hope, and humanity. As you listen to my words, as you feel the echo of my pain, I beg you to see me. See the human being who endured this, who still bears the scars, visible and invisible, and know that right now, at this very moment, countless others are experiencing the same hell. We must end this barbaric practice, not tomorrow, not next year, but now. For every moment we delay, another mind shatters, another soul is lost. We have the power to stop this, and we have the moral obligation to ensure that our justice system doesn't come at the cost of our very humanity. Let my pain, my trauma, and my testimony be the catalyst for change. Let it ignite a fire within each of you, a fire that will not be extinguished until this inhumane practice is abolished. Time for change is now. Nobody, and I mean nobody, deserves to endure what I've endured. And nobody deserves to be buried alive in a concrete coffin, forgotten and alone. Thank you for listening, for seeing me, and for bear witness to my truth.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for your strength. And thank you for your testimony, for being able to share that. I know it's not easy, but we thank you. Next, I'd like to introduce another brother of mine, Prince Alvarado, who will speak about the mental health and medical neglect that often accompanies solitary confinement. Prince's experience highlights how the prison system's disregard for both physical and mental health intensifies the suffering of those in isolation. Prince, welcome, my brother.
Thank you, Dante. And good evening to all. Solitary confinement, often referred to as prison within prison, involves confining an individual to a small cell for 22, 24 hours a day with little to no human interaction. And this is something that we all know. Research consistently shows that this extreme isolation causes profound and lasting psychological harm. If now, for individuals already struggling with mental health conditions, solitary confinement exacerbates their symptoms. In fact, studies have shown that anxiety, depression, paranoia, and hallucinations are common amongst those subjected to prolonged isolation. The absence of normal social interaction and sensory stimulation pushes the human brain into survival mode, which often leads to what experts describe as psychological torture. I mean, what happens to someone's mind when they're deprived of meaningful human contact day after day? They often lose their sense of self. Whatever sense of self that they had, they lose it. They become disconnected from reality, struggling to distinguish what is real from what is imagined. The long-term consequences of solitary confinement can include PTSD, self-harm, and increased risk of suicide. The lack of medical care, right? If the mental health impact alone is not troubling enough, the lack of adequate medical care in solitary confinement further compounds the suffering of those held in isolation. In many cases, individuals with both physical and mental health conditions are left untreated for days. This can happen for several reasons. First, the isolation makes it difficult for prisoners to access regular medical checkups, and any existing conditions are often ignored or neglected. Secondly, prison staff may dismiss medical complaints in an arbitrary and capricious manner as attempts to manipulate or leave solitary confinement, further delaying or denying care. This is frustrating. And in fact, an alarming number of incarcerated individuals report that their requests for medical attention while in solitary are either ignored or grossly delayed. Without access to proper health care, physical ailments just go untreated, and psychological suffering is often dismissed as part of the punishment. I'm going to say that one more time. Physical ailments go untreated, and psychological suffering is often dismissed as part of the punishment. But solitary confinement is not supposed to be a death sentence. It should not be a place where individuals' mental and physical health deteriorates to the point of no return. Now, my personal experience in solitary confinement, it was a journey. It was a long journey. I was a juvenile. I was young. And the officer actually liked the way my girlfriend looked, and since she didn't talk to him, he started a kind of like verbal dispute with me and locked me up, and I had to do 90 days in solitary confinement. Have you ever walked through or been in a place where you hear screams of individuals asking for medical help, or screams of individuals day in and day out throwing feces at each other? I mean, just think about that, right? Like, what humane condition is that for an individual to decide to throw feces at each other? That's inhumane. They weren't throwing feces at each other in population. It is the intentional solitary confinement that has forced their psychological thinking of self-being to deteriorate to whereas they want to throw feces at one another. Or better yet, how about you walking from a shower and somebody throws urine and feces in your face? I felt that. I actually experienced that. And I didn't know the individual. I said nothing to the individual. But his psychological trauma, his psychological deterioration took me as an enemy or whatever he took me as, and decided to throw urine and feces in my face. The officer saw this. You know what the officer did? Closed my cell. I said, "Officer, can I get some medical attention?" No response. "Take it down. Take it down. Take it down." You just seen him throw fucking, part of my language. You just seen him throw urine and feces in my face. "Can I get some medical attention?" "Take it down." No medical attention. What if that person has some type of whatever? I don't know what physical ailments this person, I don't know what medical conditions this individual had or had. What if it contained HIV? What if it contained any other STD or anything? It could have contained anything. But no medical attention, no adequate. How was my psychologically, how was I supposed to process that as a human being? Now, thankfully, after I got out, and I went to medical and I got some physical, and I couldn't even explain why I wanted a physical, back to back to back. Back to back to the doctor started asking me every time, "How come you keep getting these HIV examinations?" "Don't worry about it." I mean, thankfully and thank God they were negative. Thank God I didn't have any, that individual obviously didn't have anything, but just think about the psychological torture that has played on me, even to this day, right now. Like, I'm still going to doctors, like, "Can I I need hepatitis examination, I need HIV. Now, had I not been mentally strong enough, I had the mental fortitude to psychologically fight through that experience. What could I have turned me into, right? I could have been retaliatory and wanted to throw urine and feces at everybody. So let's just think about the individuals that do not have the mental fortitude to fight through that, the psychological fortitude to fight through that trauma and not to reiterate that behavior. Right? Violence produces violence, right? You know, and we know we are human creatures of habit, and I mean, we tend to imitate other behaviors, especially if we're confined. And if that becomes a behavior of normative, the individual should start repeating that, and that becomes a repetitive. That's inhumane, that behavior. But that behavior is forced. It is forced by solitary confinement, deteriorating the psychological. There's so much more I can speak on this, and I don't want to take up too much time. Please. Solitary confinement is inhumane. We go to prison, individuals who go to prison, the whole objective is for corrections. That is the acronym, Department of Corrections. Keeping the individual isolated for over 20 hours a day, whether they're in solitary confinement or what you call general population, like in Northern State, is inhumane. In order for an individual to rehabilitate himself socially, psychologically, needs to be socially allowed to socially gather and process the wrongdoings of their past so that they can produce themselves when they eventually get out of them prisons and become better human beings. Not to deteriorate psychologically and mentally, to therefore come back to society and perpetuate those behaviors. If we want change, we need to change how we're addressing these individuals in these prisons. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, brother. Thank you, Prince. Again, just for a second, I need you all to listen to what you're hearing. Men and women are dying mentally, physically, because of the treatment that's being endured in these prison systems. Solitary confinement must come to an end. It must be stopped. We are killing our brothers and sisters constantly. We're killing our children. This does not only affect the men and women that are locked behind these walls. This affects friends. This affects mothers, fathers, family, children. It affects us all. And it's going to take all of us to come together and fight this thing. Our next speaker, Susie Guardia. This woman is amazing. She's the epitome of strength. Like she's been through a lot. And today she's here to share her story. Susie will share her perspective on why isolated confinement must come to an end. Having personally endured the psychological and emotional toll of solitary confinement. Susie will articulate the urgent and pressing need for change and reform. Susie Guardia, everyone.
Thank you, Dante, for your kind words. Good evening. Tonight, I stand before you as a mother, as a lifelong New Jersey resident, and as someone who cares deeply about humanity to address why solitary confinement must end. There are many moral and ethical reasons why solitary confinement must end. It is dehumanizing, it is barbaric, and it is torturous. In my opinion, one of the most critical reasons is that solitary confinement inflicts severe psychological harm, which in many cases is irreparable. Studies have shown that individuals in solitary experience heightened levels of anxiety, depression, and suicidal thoughts, especially for those who are already considered a vulnerable population by the New Jersey Department of Corrections. In these dark places, in these tiny cubicles with barely any light of day, suicide or attempted suicide persists. My son has experienced this trauma in the New Jersey prisons and will be forever scarred by this inhumane practice. He barely hung on to dear life in what is called the RHU, which stands for Restorative Housing Unit. It is not restorative. In one of the New Jersey locations, prison locations, as described to me by my son during many phone calls, it was filthy with blood, urine, and semen on the walls and the floors, with rats and cockroaches everywhere. In almost every conversation, I could hear the screaming of other residents echoing their suffering through the phone. It was very cold in the winter with little to no heat. The food was always cold. He barely got out of his cell and lived in these hellish conditions for many months. He was living a nightmare. He is part of a vulnerable population and had suicidal ideations on more than one occasion. There are many more like him. I ask, why? Why, when we have data that shows psychological damage is done in solitary confinement? Why, when we have data that indicates that solitary confinement does not deter crime? In fact, it can lead to higher recidivism rates as individuals are released into society without the support and rehabilitation they desperately need. Why? When across the country, there are successful alternatives to solitary confinement being implemented. Why? When solitary is so counterproductive to what should be the goal, rehabilitation. Imagine not hearing from your son for days at a time when he is in prison. Imagine the thoughts that swirl around your head. Is he dead? Is he hurt? Is he able to speak? Is he sick? Is he on suicide watch? Imagine if your kid is on the phone telling you he's suicidal. What do you do? Imagine that the phones in prisons are used as a disciplinary tool. How cruel it is for not only the person in prison, who, like my son, held on to his sanity by talking with me, but for the loved ones who are sitting in total darkness, just waiting for the phone call. Will it be the prison calling to tell me my son is dead or maimed? Or will it be from my son allowing me to know he is alive and I can take another deep breath? Taking away one of the most crucial forms of communication to the outside world deepens the isolation and exacerbates the experience of solitary confinement. It is cruel. It has been over 5 years since the Isolated Confinement Restriction Act was passed into law. Excuses do not make up for all the lost lives and the lifelong damage caused by solitary confinement. Instead of maintaining and creating conditions that are abhorrent and extremely dangerous, the New Jersey Department of Corrections could change direction. It is a choice. The noncompliance of the New Jersey Department of Corrections with the Isolated Confinement Restriction Act undermines our commitment to justice and human rights. Our correctional facilities are places of despair and hopelessness. Let us envision a future where our correctional system is on the cutting edge, rooted in compassion, dignity, respect, understanding, and a commitment to human rights. Programs focused on mental health support, restorative justice, education, and community involvement not only promote safety, but also facilitate rehabilitation. These approaches provide individuals with the tools they need to reintegrate into society, reducing the likelihood of reoffending. That is our goal. I urge lawmakers, advocates, and the public to take a solid stand against solitary confinement in New Jersey. After all, it is our tax dollars that fund this torture. We must hold the New Jersey Department of Corrections accountable for its noncompliance and push for immediate reforms that prioritize rehabilitation over punishment. Every second counts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susie. You guys have just listened to 3 powerful testimonies. Change is needed now. Change is needed yesterday. Again, we are suffering, not just behind those walls, but we are continuing to suffer even here. As you listen to these stories, I shake. As I hear my brothers talk, I reminisce of these terms and conditions that we endured. Tears roll down my eyes. I will cry for the rest of my life when I hear a door slam. My knees get weak whenever I see a blue uniform. We need change now. Next, I would like to bring my brother, a mentor, the founder of Transformative Justice Initiative, one of the leaders in our community, Anton Henshaw. To conclude tonight's presentation, I'd like to invite Anton to share the recommendations we have put forward in our report. These recommendations are not just for reforming policies, but for transforming the way we think about incarceration and human dignity. Again, my brother, Anton Henshaw.
Thank you, my brother. Let's get it.
Tone, before you share, sorry, could I share just briefly about what the Department of Corrections said in response to our report before we go into the recommendations, just so folks can know what we're dealing with in terms of opposition. Is that okay?
Yes.
So we sent our report. You can stop screen sharing for a second. We sent our report a week ago into the Department of Corrections. We also sent it to the governor's office. We're disseminating the report to all of the legislators, specifically the ones who voted yes for this bill in 2019. And I'm going to share this with you, and Tone, you can respond to this as well. I know you'll have a response in terms of our recommendations. But the Department of Corrections responded quite simply by admitting that there is a problem with isolation and with ultimately the speedy implementation. However, they provided excuses for why this takes place rather than really owning the responsibility, the culpability. They said that they have staffing shortages. And they also said that they have dilapidated prison buildings that are really hard to not isolate people. Ultimately, I'm just going to underscore what Susie said, which is that they've had 5 years to work on this. And ultimately what we're saying is that, like Susie, every second counts. Every day that this is delayed matters for every single person inside. And as our report demonstrates, not just in the testimonies that you heard today, but the people who are currently in isolation demonstrates, this is a desperate, desperate issue that cannot be excused away by saying that they need more people, they need more money, they need more prisons. We have to see with our own eyes and hear from the people on the inside with our own ears that they are actually making strides to correct this and not just provide window dressing for us to sort of gaslight us away from this issue. So Tone, why don't you take it away? You are indeed a mentor, not just to the people on this call, but to so many. So
yeah, I'm just listening to you, my brother, and it's one of those things. So, let's get it. Like, the Department of Corrections, are you serious? Like, are you really serious? Are you saying you need more people to stop torturing people? Is that what you're saying? Right? And that's the gaslight. I mean, when you really break it down, it's saying we can't stop torturing people because we don't have enough people. So the people we have, we can only implement them in a torturous process. Come on, man, be free for it. Let's let's stop it. But I would go on to say, I put this at the feet of the legislators, and not including in the bill to have the community and the families of those that are impacted to shape what they allowed the DOC to promulgate and put in without any outcomes or any input from people that was part of our coalition and from themselves, from the legislators. But we have some strong recommendations. We're not negotiating. We put recommendations because it's a kind word, but these are our demands, right? And one of the first ones we have is we want quarterly inspections of all correctional facilities by the Ombudsman's office, all correctional facilities in the state of New Jersey. Hands down, uncompromising, quarterly, to go in there and assess what's going on and let the public know and make it public. No more hiding. The second one is we need stronger monitoring and reporting requirements. We recommended that the Department of Corrections examines the language of their isolation policies and things like that, because they didn't include it. And I remember doing those hearings the last time before this legislation passed. What the DOC was saying was, if we don't have isolated confinement, what do we have? How do we control them? Right? That's what they were saying. But when they heard our testimony, right, Nafisa Goldsmith, Ron Pierce, Justice Roundtree, myself, Mark Hopkins, they declined to testify. They relied on their written statement, right? Because they knew what they were doing was wrong and what was right in this situation. And we need stronger monitoring, right? We need stronger reporting requirements. And it can't be left up to them. It has to be people from the outside going in conjunction with the Office of the Ombudsman. We need an oversight body for each correctional facility. Just like they have people with the ombudsmans that sit on their board and have the oversight and be able to have the meetings with the ombudsman, the Department of Corrections and their correctional facilities need each one of them, whether they have an isolated confinement or RHU unit or not. Each facility needs to have people from the community to begin to monitor the structural violence that is going on in these institutions and being able to report it. And back to 4, We need an investigative hearings in the New Jersey legislators to see why this work has not been carried out the way it's been legislatively designed and how they voted. Bipartisan at that. Bipartisan. Both sides of the aisle recognize that this was torture in New Jersey and they voted to end it. So they said, and as Amos pointed out, we can't end the torture because we don't have enough people and we need more money. So you need to have more money to stop harming people. Let's understand this. Isolated confinement in any form is a public health threat to every community that a person is returned. And I'm going to give you a story real quick about what happened in Colorado. There was a young man that was in isolated confinement for decades. And he wrote to the warden before he left that I need help. I'm about to go home. I'm about to max out. And can you please give me some services? I don't want to go back out into society like this. He wrote countless letters prior to his release. Not one of his letters was answered. This guy walked up to that warden's house on the street and shot the warden dead. That's the most extreme case. That's how psychologically he was feeling, like I had nothing and nobody helped me, and it caused harm. This is bringing harms to our communities, and more people are being hurt because they don't have money or people. Let's stop this. I'll end it there.
Thank you, Tone. Thank you, and I get it. I get the frustration. This is every day you watch the news, you walk outside and you see we deal with different issues. Everyone deal with different issues, different problems in this world, and so many things get overlooked. So many things get timestamps put on them, and people decide to take care of them later. This matter, solitary confinement, is a matter that needs to be addressed now. It cannot wait. This needs attention now. I'd like to thank you all for being here, for your attention, to allow us to deliver this report on this critical issue. The stories you've heard, combined with the data that we've gathered, it all paints a picture of a broken system that must be changed. We cannot let these testimonies go unheard. We cannot let this inhumane practice of isolation continue to be swept under the rug. We must take action, and we must take action now. Thank you.
So in concluding this event, first of all, I know that not everybody has access to the chat or whatever, but I just want to, on behalf of everybody who's tuned in, thank you, each and every one of you on the screen, for the indescribable work that you've done tonight. This has been truly inspiring and also devastating. We are committing here and now, again, to continuing this fight and to deepening our commitment to seeing the Isolated Confinement Restriction Act certainly implemented, but going further than that. We need a justice system that truly is interested in true justice, restorative, community-centered, public health-centered, mental health-centered justice. As of right now, our report is fully available. Our entire report is available on our website, njpjw.org. And we thank you for tuning in. Please stick around, stay tuned into us. We will be able to share with you the progress that we make. We know that the Department of Corrections wants to meet with our coalition. We've received very recent word that they've read our report. and that they really want to ostensibly they want to get this right. So we'll see. We'll see if they do. It's not too late. It is not too late to implement this and to do a 180 and to change the way that we approach justice. Thank you, everybody. Follow us on social media. Connect with us on our website. We want to rebuild this coalition and build it big. We'll be in touch.
So
Thanks.
I would just like to very quickly add, if you have questions or comments, please just send it to contact@njpjw.org. And as a point of clarification, on a webinar, the chat doesn't work. So we got all of your questions and comments in the Q&A section. So if there's anything to be responded to, please feel free. We will be contacting you. And again, one last time, contact@njpjw.org. Thank you again for your attention here and your presence here.